The aircraft took off normally, climbed to cruising altitude. Then everyone on board slowly lost consciousness, while the plane kept flying. Helios Airways Flight 522 was a tragic aviation accident that occurred on the 14th of August, 2005, and is remembered as one of the clearest and most disturbing examples of how human error, poor communication, inadequate training, and misunderstood automation can combine into a fatal chain of events, ultimately killing all 121 people on board and leaving behind haunting questions about situational awareness and cockpit design. The flight was a Boeing 737-300 operated by the Cypriot airline Helios Airways, scheduled to fly from Larnaca, Cyprus, to Prague, Czech Republic, with a stopover in Athens, Greece, and it carried 115 passengers and 6 crew members. On the morning of the flight, the aircraft underwent routine maintenance, including checks on the pressurization system, which is responsible for maintaining breathable air inside the cabin as the aircraft climbs to high altitude. During these checks, a maintenance technician set the pressurization mode selector from auto to manual in order to test a warning system, but crucially, after completing the work, the switch was not returned to the automatic position. This single oversight would later prove fatal. When the flight crew arrived, they performed their pre-flight checks, but they failed to notice that the pressurization system was still set to manual, possibly due to checklist design, routine familiarity, and expectation bias. Shortly after takeoff, as the aircraft climbed, the cabin began to lose pressure because the system was no longer automatically regulating it. At around 12,000 feet, a warning horn sounded in the cockpit, indicating a problem. However, this horn was identical to the one used to warn of an incorrect takeoff configuration on the ground, and the pilots mistakenly interpreted it as a takeoff-related warning rather than a cabin altitude alert. This confusion was critical because it meant the crew did not recognize that the aircraft was depressurizing. The captain contacted the airline's operations center and a maintenance technician on the ground, describing issues with cooling and unusual warnings, but at no point did either the pilots or the ground personnel correctly diagnose the pressurization failure. As the aircraft continued climbing to its cruising altitude of around 34,000 feet, oxygen levels in the cabin dropped steadily. Hypoxia, a condition caused by lack of oxygen, began to impair the crew's cognitive ability, judgment, and awareness. One of the most insidious aspects of hypoxia is that those affected often do not realize they are impaired, which likely explains why the pilots did not take decisive action. Eventually, the captain and first officer lost consciousness entirely. In the passenger cabin, the oxygen masks deployed automatically, but they were designed to provide oxygen for only about 12 to 15 minutes, enough for an emergency descent, not for prolonged flight. With no conscious pilots, the aircraft continued flying on autopilot, following its programmed route toward Athens. Air traffic controllers attempted to contact the flight repeatedly, but received no response. As the aircraft approached Greek airspace and then entered holding patterns near Athens, concern escalated rapidly. Greek authorities scrambled 2 F-16 fighter jets to intercept the aircraft. When the fighter pilots approached, they made a chilling discovery. The captain's seat was empty, the first officer was slumped over the controls unconscious, and the cabin appeared lifeless, with oxygen masks hanging from the ceiling. However, in a moment that remains one of the most haunting aspects of the disaster, the fighter pilots later reported seeing a person moving in the cockpit shortly before the crash. This individual was believed to be a flight attendant who had some flight training and who may have regained consciousness using a portable oxygen bottle. He appeared to attempt to enter the cockpit and possibly take control of the aircraft, but by then it was far too late. The aircraft's engines eventually flamed out one by one after running out of fuel, and without power or control, the Boeing 737 descended uncontrollably and crashed into hills near the village of Grammatico, north of Athens. There were no survivors. The investigation that followed, conducted by Greek authorities with international cooperation, concluded that the accident was caused by the crew's failure to recognize the pressurization system was set incorrectly, combined with misinterpretation of warnings, lack of effective communication, and inadequate training regarding hypoxia and pressurization failures. The investigation also criticized Helios Airways for poor safety culture, insufficient pilot training, and inadequate oversight, noting that previous incidents involving pressurization warnings had occurred within the airline but were not proper.